Bibles to Revelation chapter 13. We're going to finish up chapter 13 tonight, which we would have done had I been able to be here Sunday, but we would have finished up chapter 13 then, and then we would have already been well into chapter 14, but that wasn't the case. So we'll finish up chapter 13 today, answer some questions quickly tonight, and then move over into chapter 14 as well. And probably before I go into chapter 14, we might take our own little interlude for a moment in the study and talk about a couple of things that I've been thinking about. Had a little extra time to sit around and think over the past few days, and so anyway, got some thoughts I want to share with you in relates to our study here out of the book of Revelation. But I want to complete chapter 13 first, and basically in chapter 13 you're dealing with two basic things. What are they? Okay, so you had a sea beast, right, that came out initially. And there seems to be with the sea beast some picture of great veracity. We see it depicted in various imageries, and we talked a little bit about Daniel's imagery in relationship to how and Daniel's imagery, by the way, just to remind you of it. Daniel's imagery was to lead us to what point in time that folks would know what. When Christ would come, right? So they would know what to, so they're being told all throughout this history, there's a great nation going to be formed, and all nations are going to flood into these promises. And by this one seed, and one man's going to, and all those things that surround that. And the truth be known, were there folks prior and after Jesus claiming to be that Messiah, that Christ? Yes. In fact, the truth be known, in modern times, there's still occasionally somebody that comes along claiming to be some kind of relevant Messiah of some type or another. So Daniel's writings give us at least a picture of the time period in which ultimately Jesus would arrive. And it was fairly simple for those, in some senses, for those in Jesus' day to recognize they were in that time period, because he talks about these four great nations, and they're able to just look at the history book real quick and see the Babylonians, and then be able to see the Medo-Persians, and then be able to see the Grecians, and go, oh, there's three, now we're in four, the Romans, and so we kind of know we're in the right time period in which Jesus should arrive. And so from simplistic prophetic ideas, Daniel kind of points to a moment in history, among other things, as relates to the coming of Christ. And so those imageries are then still being used because you're still talking about that last of the four empires. When you're dealing here in the book of Revelation, if nothing else, it's the contemporary power that exists in that particular moment in time. And so even if someone wants to argue that the book of Revelation really isn't about the Roman Empire, or wants to argue that it's really not about the authoritarian leaders among the Romans, that, you can't argue, but that's the time period we are dealing with. These things are being written while Roman rulers are in charge, and their empire is in great power. And so those imageries point us to the coming of Jesus, so we kind of know when that time period of His kingdom to take place. And we're in the very early stages of that kingdom taking its shape and form. The body, the church, the kingdom, all of those describing the same people but different aspects of them. And so Revelation very much uses those same kinds of pictures and imageries that you see under those Old Testament prophets to illustrate the same kinds of things. Really all you have here is you have two elements. You have the sea beast comes forth, and he's just raw power. Okay? He is just overcoming people from just physical prowess. And then what happens to him? He's wounded, right? So much so that he's wounded to the point where folks thought he should be dead. But what happened? Wound heals up. Okay? And there's marveling, the text says. There's this amazement that's going on. And we talked a little bit about last Wednesday about the fact that amazement may have kind of two different aspects. It may be the idea that they're amazed that he was wounded to begin with, but it also may have the amazement that they thought he was dead, but he survived this, and now he's revived. And so there's the sea beast. Then what happens next? Who comes forth in verse 11? The earth beast, right? Sea beast, now in verse 11, the earth beast comes up out of the earth. And he's a little different. Remember all that description of that first sea beast and just the various narratives in relationship to it. This beast has a very simplistic kind of imagery. He says that he has two horns like a what? Like a lamb, and he speaks as a dragon. Generally speaking, who's the dragon in Revelation? Satan. He's probably the most defined of all the descriptions that are found within the book of Revelation. So here's the dragon, Satan. And this beast has horns like a lamb, but the voice of the dragon. What do you think of when you think of lamb? Especially in the book of Revelation. You think of Jesus. Let's just be honest about that for a minute. Okay? Generally, the descriptions of the lamb in the book of Revelation are references to Jesus. John says, I turned thinking I was going to see the Lion of Judah, but rather I saw the lamb that was slain. And so generally we think of Jesus. We think of spiritual things. We think of righteousness. We think of purity when we think of a lamb. The distinction here is, number one, he doesn't say he was a lamb. He said he had what? Two horns like a lamb. He has the appearance of a lamb, but the voice of the dragon. In many ways, he's more dangerous. Because he becomes more dangerous because he's not just this overwhelming physical presence that the sea beast is illustrated as. But this earth beast comes at us with a much subtler approach. He comes at us like this lamb, like this two-horned lamb. And yet he speaks lies and hypocrisies and blasphemies. His voice isn't pure. His truth is non-existent. But his appearance is far different. And what's he compelling people to do? Okay, it's the first one, right? And so we talked a little bit about the fact that there's some evidences within Roman history that you could point to that show how there were ambassadors and different entities that come to the aid of the Roman Empire. They become the voice. And we could look at all of that imagery and maybe make some assumptive and somewhat speculative comparisons. But don't miss the point here. The point is, they were first dealing with a physical challenge of a nation that was wreaking havoc upon them. Now they're dealing with religious challenge, spiritual appearances, but it's Satan behind it all the while. Now, lots of folks have tried to pinpoint who is that some specific entity? Is that one particular religious entity? Is there a particular religious man that's being under discussion there? Or who? I'm more convinced the longer I look at it that the warning here is just simply that there are twofold kinds of calamities that befall Christians. And some of them are physical calamities and some of them are faith calamities where you've got to deal with false teachers, false prophets of all types and kinds from various angles and purposes. Because their emphasis is not just to overwhelm people and be destructive, but their emphasis is to get people to do what? Bow down and worship. Okay? Turn the first beast, turn the sea beast into an image of worship. This is a spiritual challenge that's happening here in the latter part of the text. And he says, he doth, verse 13, great wonders, so that he maketh fire come down from heaven on the earth in the sight of men, and deceiveth them that dwell on the earth by the means of those miracles which he had power to do in the sight of the beast, saying to them that dwell on the earth that they should make an image to the beast which had the wound by a sword and did live. Now, that might point to some specificity there. It gives us maybe a little bit of a clue that the wound that the original beast under discussion withstood came from the sword. When you think of the sword in these imageries, you're thinking about warfare, battle, conflict. And so quite possibly that's the imagery being driven at here, that originally the sea beast received a wound from battle of some kind, but he healed. And now the second is perpetuating the idea that folks should fall down and worship the image of the first. And then he says, and so much so that they have used even what will appear to be miraculous abilities to encourage people to do this. Here to me is the great warning or the great lesson of that. There are going to be times where there are going to be religious questions, spiritual issues that you and I have to address and work through. They're going to be very sobering and serious and difficult questions to address. And there are going to be times where there are going to be some very persuasive arguments and persuasive measures being used to pull us away from the truth of Jesus Christ. Notice, he said that we're not just telling them to bow down. We're performing a miracle and then telling them to bow down. We're giving them some persuasive argument and then telling them it's the first beast is worthy to be worshipped. And so the warning for me, in some ways, is this: we have to be highly careful because even certain levels of falsehood can be wrapped in levels of truth or persuasive arguments or something that's palatable and lead me to start thinking differently than what truth is revealed to me. And that's really the danger he's describing. Now, we're not into chapter 14 yet, but just fast forward for 30 seconds here for a moment, and then we'll actually get into details in a little while. But the very next conversation that we're going to have in chapter 14 is the narrative goes from warning us about these beasts to telling us, if you get tricked, there's consequence. If you get fooled by these persuasive measures and you decide that maybe I should fall down and worship. Maybe I should bow to Rome. Maybe I should bow to whomever is influencing us away from truth. There's consequence. And so here are the warnings in chapter 13. Here are the ways that these influences are going to work. And then chapter 14 tells us of the consequences of how it is we react to that. And we'll get there in a minute. So he had power to give life unto the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause that it, as many as would not worship the image of the beast, should be killed. Let me tell you, that's sobering. It's hard for us to even get our minds around that. But it had become so severe that it was either bow down or die. Now, God's people have seen that prior to that, haven't they? Give me one example where you can think of quickly, probably, of people that were told bow down or die. In Daniel's day, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego jump out at us, right? When we think of that, it's bow down or die. That concept, God's people have had to battle that challenge and that difficulty for a long, long time. Where the threats become more than just verbal, it's more than just mocking, it's more than just disagreeing, it's more than just emotional, but they're real threats. And we've got to make a decision. Stand up and be a believer or don't. Stand up and be accounted as a follower of Christ or bow down to the beast. Your choice. But you do it knowing the imminent danger you just placed yourself in by making that decision. I think sometimes we without over-trivializing our problems, because I never want to act like that people's problems aren't real. I never want to be that way when I start comparing things. But the truth is, we don't. I have never faced anything even near this. Where you think about it, the kinds of things that we just feel like are just shaking us to the core aren't even close to the kinds of challenges these folks are facing. Again, I'm not trying to trivialize. I'm trying to challenge us to recognize that if this is the standard by which God challenges us, if this is the standard where He says, stay with the truth or suffer the consequence, even if it means dying, even if it means making ultimate and challenging and sacrificial decisions in order to stay your faith in your relationship with God. It got to such an extent that there was a requirement, according to verse 16, that people be able to show identification. He said that both free and bond were to, small and great, rich and poor, were to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads, that no man might buy or sell, save he that had the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. And we'll talk about that in a second when we get to the next verse. But think about it. Here's an identifying mark, and you can speculate all day long just like I could about what manner in which that was happening. But the simple thought is, if you weren't able to show evidence that you were bowing down to the beast, in my humble estimation, if you weren't bowing down to the Roman power and authority, if you weren't worshiping Rome to the point where it was your priority and your religious convictions were down here somewhere, and you couldn't identify yourself in that fashion, you say, well, maybe I could escape being killed. Well, you might be able to, but try to go to the marketplace and see what happens. You may have goods that are valuable, but you can't sell them because you refuse to identify with the worship of the beast. You may need something to purchase, but you can't purchase it because you don't have the right identification, and you're unwilling, hopefully, to be identified with the worship of the beast. And so they're not just their lives in the imminent, but their basic sustenance of life, their very existence was being put to the test. How far are you willing to live your faith? That's really the question at hand. How far are you willing to live your faith? And to what extent are you willing to go? Are you willing to live your faith in such a way that you know that no more are you going to be able to buy, sell, that your life at any point in time is in danger of death? Well, what am I really willing to do in honor of my faith and my convictions in my relationship with Jesus? And then he identifies that. Here's the wisdom. Let him that hath understanding count the number of the beast. For it is the number of a man. His number is 666. Now, it's interesting. And there's various... But generally, when we say 666, who's your thought? Devil. There's a problem with that in this part anyway, right? What's the part? He said the number is that of man. Okay, it's got an earthly context. Okay, 666 has an earthly context, not a devil context. And in fact, it's related here. He says to man and to the number of the beast, not the dragon. Okay, Satan's the dragon, and so I understand people's anxieties in some senses over wanting to not be associated with anything associated with Satan. I can appreciate that. But remember, he said this was the number of a man, and his number is 666. It's related, if I'm not misunderstanding this here, to how they were identifying. And men willing, what's the perfect number? 7. And so 666. Imperfection on top of imperfection on top of imperfection. Who's that describe? It describes man perfectly, doesn't it? That we're the imperfect ones. But if you were not willing to be identified with imperfect man, the emperor, the worship of that emperor, the worship of men in the nation, if you're unwilling to be identified with the number of a man, rather than the number, if you will, of your Savior, then you may not be able to buy and sell. You may die at the hands of the sword somewhere because of it. But you got to make a choice. What kind of identification do we want to carry? What do we want to wear? And that's the challenge he's setting before this audience of people he's writing this to. He admits it's sobering. He fully acknowledges it's dangerous. He fully acknowledges that lives are on the line and livelihoods are on the line. And this is sad and bleak and it's horrible to even think about. But where will you stand? That's the question that's being asked. And will you identify with men, or will you identify with God and His Son and the true Lamb? And we'll see that more in chapter 14. All right. Thoughts, comments, things I missed. Go ahead, Mary. Yeah, there are certainly there are all kinds of different parts of the world where Christianity is completely unacceptable, and that's an understatement. And people's lives are in danger, and that kind of, you can see that unfold. Well, if we were privy to it, probably daily, where folks are challenged because of their faith in certain parts of the world. Anything else that you thought of, or I missed, or have a different thought about?
The same verses Mary talked about, 11 to about 15. I've seen kind of a parallel here between 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, where it talks about some tradition.
Yeah.
Even him whose coming is after the work of Satan, all power, signs, and wonders.
Yeah.
And one that got me is, it says, 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 11. And for this cause God shall send them strong.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's pretty old. That's pretty old language.
Yeah. Yeah. That it
where they should believe a lot.
Yeah. And your choices have consequence. And if you choose to walk away from truth, then God says that I'm not going to stop the perpetuating of falsehood just to protect you. I'm not going to freeze those who are trying to tell lies about what you should do religiously or what you should. I'm not going to stop it just in order to protect the faithful so that they don't have to make decisions and choices. Exact opposite. He says, I'm going to allow it. I'm going to allow it to be furthered. In fact, there's empowerment in these verses about how the authority was given to these entities, regardless of who you may think they are. But power was given to these entities to go and do these things, and the challenges that need to be answered by the faithful. Any other thoughts? And we've talked about that, and I'm not sure about the text, but it has that same influence. Yep. Yeah. If you have your questions, you'll grab them real quick, and we'll answer them briefly. Not all of them were questions, and so we'll skip through some of it. But in the beginning of the chapter, John saw a great beast rising up out of the sea. That was the first thing he saw. And the expression sea probably means humanity and nations. I don't think we're dealing with the real body of water. C and D were just statements. E, his power, throne, and authority come from the from the dragon or Satan. And then you saw, refer to chart number 1. Who's got chart number 1? Who's got chart number 2? Nobody? That's right, you don't have it. It's at the end of this. I didn't realize that he was going to make references to them. And so it's that, remember I told you it's this thick, and I can give you a whole copy if you want it, but it's this thick if you wanted it all together. And so you didn't get that, but I think you can answer this question. If you just went to the chapters, you would have been able to answer basically this. What work? Did anybody look at it? Find it in Daniel 7? What is it? So Babylonian, the lion, Medo-Persian, the bear, the Grecians, the leopard. Okay. And then you see those imageries later about Rome as well. The fourth beast, the fourth world kingdom, which is described as dreadful, terrible, and strong, may be identified as the Romans, and we note that through that section. Okay, jump to H, because you did not have chart 2. The fourth beast, the fourth world empire, and the sea beast appear to be the same. I heard both answers. The fourth beast out of Daniel, which is Rome, and the sea beast, which is Rome. I believe that's true. Maybe I didn't hear false. Maybe my ears are going crazy. Thus, the beast out of the sea may be identified as the Roman Empire, which received power and a worldly throne, a great authority from the dragon or Satan to war against the saints. That's true. He did receive that ability. In the days of these kings, God set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed. That's true as well. It came under Jesus. Skip to L. One of the 7 heads of the sea beast was okay, mortally, deadly, depending on what you were reading from. It didn't. King James didn't really read that way, and so it was a little different. I put deadly just because that was the word used. To worship the beast, Rome is to worship the dragon. That's true. List 4 things given to the beast. Okay, power to war, power to overcome, and power over all. And what would be the 4th one? Okay, mouth speaking blasphemy. And if you add verse 5, and I try to look at that, and you can put anything you want in terms of the different lists. I put time. Yeah, for a limited time. He was given a period of time in which he was able to accomplish these things. The beast blasphemed. Yeah, 1, 2, 3, and 5. I'm not sure. I don't know whether he was trying to trick us or whether that was a mistake, throwing the Roman Empire. I don't think he would blaspheme himself in that sense. And I looked, to be honest with you, I looked to make sure I wasn't misreading. I don't think there's any evidence of that. So the first 3 and the 5th one work. Authority was given to the over every kindred, tongue, and nation. The sea beast was given authority for 42 months and made war with the saints. How long did the 4th beast in Daniel make war with the saints? Okay, that's true. If you read those texts, till the ancient day of days come, I believe was referenced in Daniel chapter 7 as well. Did you see anything else? Those were the only 2 that seemed to be evident to me out of that list from that description. Who will worship the beast? That's a trick question in some ways. Which one? Yeah. If you read the text and you saw the first few words, you would have just probably checked that one and went on. But really, what he qualifies is he says, all who dwell on the earth, except those whose names were in the Lamb's Book of Life. And so the writer of the worksheets just kind of reversed the phrase. And so answer 2 is probably the accurate answer. The saints may have to endure captivity or even death by the sword, which will require, 1 and 2. And compromise is not on the table. All right, skip ahead. There's more. Okay. Uh-huh. Okay. I here's Roman Empire. Let me go back and look at. No, I scratched out the Roman Empire. Look on my screen real quick, Marlene. I scratched out the Roman Empire. All right. Okay, you're good. List 2 characteristics of the earth beast. Okay. 2 horns like a lamb, but the voice of the dragon. So he's got the qualities of a lamb, but also, in many senses, the qualities of Satan. The dragon or the devil is a murderer and speaks as a liar. Elsewhere, the earth beast is called a false prophet, an unclean spirit. There were varying descriptions that you could have felt there. The earth beast, and that's why we talked about how there's a spiritual context to the earth beast as opposed to the sea beast. The earth beast causes the earth and those who dwell in it to worship the beast from the sea. The earth beast performs great signs, making fire. Okay, so these were persuasive things that were going on. It would be hard for Christians to distinguish from. He deceives the dwellers on earth by those signs, telling them to make an image. Okay, and the earth beast was given power to give life and speak. So, one thing you might say, well, what threat is an image, right? What real threat could just some image be? But then he further metaphorically illustrates that it's not just an image that's been created that's the problem. The image was given life and voice and a power and abilities to have effect and influence. And that's really where the challenge comes. Those who would not worship the beast should be killed. The earth beast causes all to be given a mark on their forehead or on their right hand. And it was necessary to have the mark of the beast to buy or sell. Normally doesn't have 3 L's. And the number of the beast, 666, has meaning to both of those things. But it's related to man. And that was kind of the emphasis we made at the end of chapter 13. Okay. So therein is chapter 13. I'm sorry it went a week extra for us to get there. Let me pause for a minute and share some thoughts with you. And I've tried to do this sporadically throughout our study. And I don't know whether it helps you or not to know why I'm presenting the way I am or why I've said what I've said. I think sometimes if I stop and give you a little bit of insight to how I'm thinking, it might help you understand why I'm looking at something in a particular perspective. And one of the things that I thought about, especially today, was what if I didn't have any other source but the Scriptures? What conclusions would I be making about the book of Revelation? What if I didn't know anything about the Roman Empire? What if I have no access whatsoever to secular history books? And I don't want to dive too far down this path, but I want you to at least give it a thought for a minute. And I've said similar things before. You've probably heard me say. I think we make a mistake when we view the Scriptures solely from an English-speaking American perspective. The Bible was not made solely for English-speaking Americans. The Bible was intended for every part of creation. From its inception till this world ends, God intends every nation, every kingdom, every tongue to have opportunity to know about His Son and to know about the salvation that comes in Him and to know and appreciate the beauty of the gospel, irregardless of where I am. And let's be honest for a moment. I won't speak on your behalf. I'm going to tell you just flat out from me. I am challenged at times because I come at the Bible with bias. I have a bias. I'm an English-speaking American who has a basic understanding historically about how religion has unfolded in America and how certain things have occurred throughout that history. And I, at times, have to be willing to try to set aside the preconceived notions and make sure that I'm actually understanding what I'm reading. That I'm not just viewing it as I've always been told to view it. That I'm not just looking at it from the perspective of what I've always been, that I always should, this is the way it is. But I have to be willing to recognize that it's absolutely possible for me to come at the book of Revelation with some bias. And I think that's what's happened to a lot of folks. A lot of folks, for example, like the idea of a rapture. So they come at the book of Revelation with a rapture bias. Folks like the idea of 144,000 literal saved souls in heaven. And so they come at the Scriptures with that bias. We like the idea of a 1,000-year reign upon the earth, a millennium. And so we come at the book of Revelation with that bias. I like the idea of how the Roman Empire fits in the narrative of the book of Revelation. And so I come at it with that bias. Now you say, well, what's your point? Well, here's my point. What if I was devoid of any of that? What if it was possible? Which it's not, by the way. It's impossible. But what if it was possible for me to just come at the book of Revelation without one single shred of thought or preconceived idea that was already fed to me before I ever read the book? What would I learn from it? And I'm convinced, and I could be 100 miles wrong on this, but I'm convinced that much of the speculation that occurs surrounding the book of Revelation is because of predetermined bias. We become speculative because we want it to mean something. We've decided in our minds that we want it to mean this, or we want it to mean that. And so because of that, I push a mindset that fits that narrative. And maybe in the process I really miss out on what's happening here. I believe that if I was just reading this, well, let me step back from it. We could talk all day long about why didn't John be more specific? Why didn't he say at some point, I'm talking about the Roman Empire? Maybe the reason is God doesn't want us to focus on the Roman Empire. What God wants us to focus on is what is the message of the book. God doesn't want us maybe, if God wants us to identify that this particular description is talking about this man. He could have easily done that. And I agree with some of the thought processes of how the message was going to have to be protected, and it would have been hard for this message to have any kind of free course if the Romans figured out it was about them. But I'm also the believer on the other side of that if God wanted His message to get to the 7 churches of Asia, God would have got His message to the 7 churches of Asia. And so it's not just about, to me, the idea that the book has to be secretive. Maybe there's a reason why. Well, no, there's definitely a reason why. God isn't specifying a lot of the things that we would like Him to. That He's not identifying things the way we would like Him to, maybe. Now, I may not be able to figure out all those reasons, but I'm willing to accept the fact that God had a reason. And maybe my responsibility with the book of Revelation is less about trying to figure out where do the pieces fit and who do they specifically describe, and more about what is it teaching me in my circumstance, in my relationship with God, in my walk with the Savior. And that particularly hit home. And I've always thought that way, by the way, about the book. But that particularly hit home with these 2 chapters. Because basically what I saw was, Brian, there are going to be physical challenges that are going to rock. What are you going to do? There are going to be spiritual challenges that rock your faith. What are you going to do? Men, 666, the number of the man. Men, with their wisdom and understanding, are going to do everything they can to rock your faith. What are you going to do? And that's what chapter 14 is about. What are you going to do? What am I going to do when it's not the Romans against the Christians of the first century? Brian, what are you going to do when it's you and the world of 2016? What am I going to do when it's me? Because we can all day long and look at these things from historical perspectives and challenge our thinking and thought processes about how these pieces fit into certain aspects. And there is some historical pieces of this. Don't misunderstand me. I think he's trying to help them appreciate that they're in the time period in which Jesus came, established His kingdom. You're now becoming part of it. There's responsibility in that. I get all that. But maybe just it'll help us if we step back and maybe quit asking, what does it mean? And this is going to sound semantical, but ask, what does it mean to me? Not just what idea can I throw out there about it. What does it mean to me? And how does it encourage? How does it warn? How does it motivate? How does it challenge me? And so now let's look at chapter 14. Yes, go ahead. And I agree. Well, certainly. And I'm not saying that we don't. But it is a challenge that I think that particularly with this study. Because and here's the difference. I think that for the most, and we're probably, but for the most part, we kind of, well, maybe not as good as we should, but we kind of do, right? We kind of look at the rest of the New Testament and say, that's about me. I don't have a clue what Revelation's about. Yeah. Yeah.
And I had one guy I watch sometimes. He put it perfectly one time. If you have a will and you bequeath certain things to certain people, yeah, I've always stuck to this notion, just from comparing scripture to scripture. The whole Bible is full time.
Yeah.
It's not written
To yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And I tell you, I always go back to just 2 Timothy, to chapter 2:15.
Yeah.
the word truth. And you mentioned bias, and this is one thing I've struggled with. You talked about how people put bias on Revelation. Well, when scholars put bias in newer versions of our scripture, take away verses. All this wasn't in the old ancient manuscripts. They changed wording. Rightly divide the word of truth. This is an example. Rightly handle the word of truth. We're not to handle the word of truth.
Yeah. And there can be challenges sometimes.
So, that bias is coming from other sources as well, and that's the thing that gets me sometimes.
Yeah, there certainly biases can creep up at any level, in any aspect of things, and the word of caution is be aware of that. And when you're reading, when you're studying, when you're doing anything, be aware that there can be human influences and biases that are affecting how certain things are happening. Absolutely.
John, where he's at, when he writes he's there.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Okay. 3 minutes. We'll get all 14 done. Ready? All right. So he says, and I looked, and lo, a lamb stood on Mount Zion, and with him 144,000, having his father's name written in their foreheads. Okay, so we've already introduced to that number earlier, right? And who were they? Well, but who specifically in the study of the Revelation were those 144,000? Well, you're still not going back into the book where we need to go. If you recall, when the woes started coming and the calamity started coming, he said, go seal up, before we released it, go seal up the believers. And the sealed believers on the earth were 144,000. The first time we saw that number was in relationship to the sealed, the protected of believers before the unleashing of the challenges of God within His judgment. And so I believe we're probably dealing with the same imagery or same concept. And we talked then about the fact that number is representation of the whole. It can easily balance between the 12 apostles. You can see the multiplication relationship to the 12 tribes of Israel. But within definitive descriptions, it described a group of individuals who were being sealed and protected when the judgment of God came forth on the earth. But now he says, Jesus, the Lamb, has these 144,000 with him that have been identified. Remember, they were sealed, identified. And I heard a voice from heaven as the voice of many waters, and as of the voice of a great thunder, and heard the voice of harpers harping with their harps. And they sang as it were a new song before the throne and before the four beasts and the elders. And no man could learn that song but the 144,000. Now notice, which were redeemed from the earth. So, in our earlier notation of these 144,000, they were sealed on the earth. They're now being described as having been what? Redeemed. Okay? Now, for your study before you come back, just think about this for a moment. What is he describing? He's describing the redeemed, the church, the body. How am I going to be able to avoid the consequences of what's about to be described to those who defile themselves? I have to be part of the redeemed. And the rest of the narrative of the New Testament teaches me how to be redeemed. 144,000 isn't a specific number. It isn't a limitation number. We're saying once we reach that number, and real quickly, let me illustrate that to you just for your own study. Because if it does, if 144,000 is specific, and it refers to exactly 144,000 souls, I'm sorry, ladies, none of you are part of it. You know why? Because notice what he said. These are they which were not defiled with women, for they are virgins. Only men. So be careful. Be careful. You start taking things literally, and all of a sudden it creates greater consequence than you ever thought. Because only men could be part of that number and fit that description. And we all know that there isn't a lick of truth to that. And I'll give you more Bible about that, not just a lick of truth. Lord willing, next time.